Are we good? Right, with over 18% of the UK population now being aged over 65, that's almost 4% growth in the last 30 years, and expected to reach a quarter of the entire population in the next 25 years. We discuss some real life scenarios for those with parents or elderly relatives straight after this. And welcome to episode 6 of our series 2 Beardos Media. Majid, how are we doing?
I'm all right, thanks.
Did I catch you off guard?
You know what? I've had such a tiring week, but I'm good. I'm ready for this. Let's do it. Let's do it.
Not too old for this, no?
I'm never too old for anything, man. What are you on about?
So you're not in that 18% category just yet, are you?
Not just yet.
A few years on you.
I feel like it sometimes, but my kids might have a different opinion on that.
They might put you in a different category. 18% of the entire UK population over 65.
And that's predicted to go up to a quarter, like 25%.
25%
within the next
25 years.
25 years. So that's a quarter of the population that's going to be over the age of
65.
So for most people who are already around, it's either their existing parents or their parents, their existing parents, or they themselves are going to fall into that category. For the 25% of the population.
Well, that's us, isn't it, in 25 years?
Talk about yourself. I'm just so, actually,
it's about bang on.
That's bang on for me, yeah.
Yeah. So by the time we get to 65 or over 65, we're going to make up for 1/4 of the entire population. It seems a lot, doesn't it?
It is a lot.
Is it just because we're of a certain age, or is it because when we were younger, I didn't see or think that there was that many old people? Then again, we're not saying 65 is old. That's purely what the statistic relates to. I think the numbers fall to about 8% or 6% over the age of 80. Now that's still quite high, isn't it?
People are tending to live longer now.
Yeah.
So naturally, there are more people of the elderly age, trying to choose my words correctly here, or diplomatically. Senior age. Yeah. More people of that age as we go along. So the more time, so because people are living longer, there's going to be more people surviving longer. So a lot of the population is going to be increasing in age.
Yeah.
Generally speaking.
Now, what does that mean for most people? That for us, we're obviously, it might be too late for us because we're going to be in that category, right?
Yeah.
In those 25 years. But what about now? Because this is a lot of people's reality, isn't it? Times continue to change.
Yeah.
Lifestyles continue to change.
Yeah.
Commitments just seem to be going up and up. Are you feeling that? Are you seeing that around you?
Do you think commitments are going up and up, or we are made to feel that we need to commit to things which aren't necessarily real commitments to be made?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. But there's still commitments nonetheless. If you choose to honor something and give your time and everything else, it's a commitment.
It's a choice that you commit to something. But the thing is, we're choosing to commit to things, which is putting our real relationships on the back burners. A lot of the time, social media is a classic example. People are watching us live, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe watching this or listening to this afterwards. It's a choice that's been consciously made that they're going to take the time to do that.
So Beardos Media is a commitment, albeit a choice, but it's a commitment.
Make sure you commit. Yeah.
So people are getting busier.
Yeah.
More occupied.
Yeah.
Probably under more stress and everything else. And then there's the added factor of your parents aging.
Yeah, this is this is more complex than I actually thought it was. This particular topic of looking after your parents, because there are so many more variables to be considered when it comes to looking after your parents than I actually thought there would be. I remember putting up a post on my Facebook page a couple of weeks ago, something to do with that I noticed back in the day how some people had, not treated their parents well, and their children have turned to be the same, except they've turned it up a few notches. I've had a couple of friends comment on that and gave me scenarios which are not, we would assume they're not, they're beyond what you would normally see within a relationship between parents and children. But it's not uncommon as uncommon as I thought it was.
As it used to be, perhaps.
Or as it used to be. So one of my friends commented that she was brought up by her grandparents, mostly because her parents couldn't actually look after them because of financial constraint as much as they would have liked to. So she doesn't have that relationship with her parents as maybe other people may have with their parents.
Yeah.
Now, I think a lot of this comes down to what kind of values we've been either brought up in or what we've observed around us. I think that there's no denying that the Asian community, irrespective of their religion, whether it's the Muslim community, the Hindu community, the Sikh community, predominantly the Asian community are much more into feeling like it's an obligation to look after your parents. So in the older generation, if they did that, their kids will have seen it, and then they are more likely, the probability is higher, it doesn't mean it's certain, but the probability is higher that they will also look after their parents because they've seen it being observed for themselves.
And that was the norm for them, wasn't it? It was the done thing. But do you think that's changed now that we're more sort of accustomed to, I don't know, the lifestyle here in the West, for example?
I think there's a dichotomy in the cultures.
Sorry, what?
There's a conflict in the different cultures that, especially for the immigrant community, for the migrant community. For the migrant community, what we have to understand is we are brought up in split cultures. We've got a culture at home and we've got a culture in our environment around us. Yes.
Okay.
Now, I remember even from a young age where my friends my colleagues, my counterparts at school, the non-Asians, there were discussions taking place then, can't wait to leave home, can't wait to turn 16 to leave home. Or the parents would say something like, I can't wait till he gets out of the house and out of our way so we can enjoy our life, me and the missus. Do you know what I mean? Those kind of discussions. Now, again, I would argue that was a fairly recent phenomena in comparison to what it used to be like back in the early 1900s. I mean, we were born in 19-somethings, right? Those people who were born in 2000 onwards may have a different outlook on life, and maybe we need to find out and explore that. But we have a conflict in cultures. So what we see at home sometimes is completely different to what we see outside the home. The question is then which one of those cultures is more prevalent or influencing our way of thought and our way of life. So the culture that's going to influence us more is the culture that we're more likely, there's a higher probability that we're going to revert back to at a certain time or point in our lives. I think when we're single, we view life in a different way, or we're a bit more free. But when we have our own children, that's when we think about the upbringing of our children and what we're actually demonstrating to them, what we're showing them in return, what they will do when they grow older. So I think our parents would probably have been the same. When they didn't have kids, their lifestyle would have probably have been different to when they did have kids. You hear the common phrase, don't you? Life changes when you've got kids. You have a different outlook on life when you've got kids. Some people, when they've had kids, when they've had boys, they're different. But when they've had girls, that changes them.
Yeah.
I know sisters who started wearing hijab once they had girls. they're motivated, that kind of influenced them to do something different in their lives because they felt that there had to be a certain type of a role model for their child or for the girl in particular. Yeah. When people have kids, generally, I think it changes their outlook on life and the way they are perceived. Even
the discussion of culture is quite an interesting one, but I think over these recent years, it's less and less valid. I just think that culture is almost being washed out. So the first generation migrants that came here were very much connected to how things were back home. Very traditional, very customary, everything. The second and third generation,
it's becoming a bit more wishy-washy.
I think the second generation,
we're still closer.
We're able to pick and choose.
Yeah.
So they were sort of, are we,
do you class yourself
heritage?
Do you class yourself as second or third generation?
In what sense? In migrant?
Yeah.
Well, it was my parents that came here.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I'd be the second generation.
Yeah.
So I think for us, in fact, that's a good example. For us, we were able to choose. We either went with the way of our parents and grandparents, or we kind of thought, we're here now. We're in the UK now. We do things differently here. The third and fourth generations, I don't know. I don't think it's a case of them picking one or the other.
There's another issue here because you have situations which are, I guess, in the minority, but you have situations cross-culturally where abuse takes place, whether it's domestic violence and domestic abuse, and you see parents doing certain things and treating their spouses or their parents in a certain way, and that affects how that individual will see or view life and relationships as well, and how they then perceive how people should be treated based on what they've seen, passively even, and that's a big thing as well, because for some people, I know of another friend who made the comment that she was sexually abused by her own father. Now, if you were to try and motivate somebody like that to look after and respect their parents, how can you do that?
Yeah, it's difficult.
It's a tough one, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a really tough one. So I think you've got the status quo of what the ideals would like. Ideally, this is how you could have a productive or a healthy relationship within your family, that everybody's looked after as the generations go down. Because if you think about it in that way, there's a cycle of life, isn't it? Right? So, thinking of The Lion King now.
Is that what it's from? It rang a bell.
That's the circle of life, isn't it? The Lion King, Simba. So you've got, if you've seen your parents looking after their parents until they've left the world.
Yeah.
And you've seen them work hard and make sacrifices, and you as a family have done that, you're more likely to do that for your own parents. I think, just as a probability.
Definitely,
yeah. Obviously, you always have the exception. You always have people who change their ways or change their thinking or whatever. I think for certain religions, people who would adhere to the Islamic belief, for example, it's a mandatory thing. There's no option, right? But you do have now, even in Muslim majority countries, where people are sending their parents into places where they can be looked after because they feel they have responsibilities which don't allow them or get in the way of looking after their parents, and is better for their parents. Yeah. And some people are just getting rid of them.
Yeah.
That's the reality.
There's a way in which they're able to kind of justify it, first to themselves in their own minds, isn't it? We won't be able to do them justice. We won't be able to, serve them the way that we... Or
they deserve to be served.
I think that's where it started, isn't it? And now, if I'm honest, I think we are in a time where a lot of people are in a difficult situation. It's actually a reality, albeit there's still a taboo and it's still frowned upon in our culture. But there's a lot of people that are just stuck, because their life is so busy, and they're working on, for example, minimum wage, and suddenly all these things that didn't mean anything before are now necessities. So your expenditure is just crazy. You're having to work extra hours. A lot of the time, both spouses will work. Traditionally, one of the two would be home. It would usually be the wife. She'd stay home and look after the parents and tend to their needs and everything else. I think we've come a long way away from that.
But then the question arises, what's wrong with that, right? So the question when people who do that, who would send the parents into old people's homes or, places of residence where they can get looked after, they can simply argue, what's wrong with that? If they're getting better care there than they are with us, what's wrong with that? That's, I think, it's a very... It's a tricky one because
it's a very tricky one.
Yeah, because this is why I said for me this topic isn't as simple as I actually thought it was going to be.
No,
because when I looked into it, I thought to myself, if I put myself in that person's situation or that person's situation, how do I make sense of it all? Do you know what I mean? How does it even make sense? I mean, some of us, we would go bend over backwards and make all the sacrifices that we feel need to be made to make sure that our parent stays with us, irrespective of what situation they're in. So for some people, it might be a case that I don't care. If my parent is ill, if she needs to have, constant care, whether she needs to be cared for in, personal hygiene even, because...
that was the other side of it, wasn't it? There was people who genuinely weren't able to provide round-the-clock care at home. But for fear of what people would say about their parent, their mother or the father being in a care home, they said, no, you're staying home. You're staying in that room. I'll tend to you when I can, but nobody's getting a chance to say anything.
So it's more a case of what other people might say rather than them doing it for sincerely.
But you see how complex this is, though?
Yeah,
it's crazy complex because
it's
not just a question of should elderly people be put into care if they have certain needs or medical or whatever else. It's so much more than that. It's like a multi-part question. And
well, Nasima says there are so many elderly who are being abused as a result of staying with family, physical, mental, financial abuse, some intentional and others unintentionally. And that's another thing, there's another dimension here, because if your elderly person in the house owns a bit of property, okay,
I think you just added another dimension on top of that dimension. Okay.
Right? Then that adds another dimension to it, and you think and then you people can assume, well, is that person doing it for what the elderly person owns? Are they wanting to? Is it because of inheritance or stuff like that? Is that the only reason they're doing it? Maybe they're not sincere. Maybe they're only doing it because of this, that, and the other.
See, I'm glad somebody mentioned that abuse isn't always intentional.
Yeah, I think from that perspective, that I would say the primary question is to ask the person who is being cared for what their wishes are. I think that's where this ends up, because if they choose to stay with you, it's their choice at the end of the day. If they choose to say, okay, I want to stay with my family, I don't want to go anywhere else, irrespective of better care and everything, I want to be around my loved ones, then that should hold high in the decision-making process.
Oh yeah, very high, yeah.
Because you yourself, I mean, let's just say there's a couple and they've got kids and they're looking after an elderly person. The elderly person wants to stay with them, but the couple themselves may struggle to then look after them in the way that they should be looked after or could be looked after. Then what do you do? How do you explain to the elderly person, look, Ami, Abu, I don't want anything more than you to be with us, but she's at work, I'm at work, kids are at school, got to look after them, got to go to, tend the business, blah, 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 X, Y, and Z. Sorry, I don't mean to say blah, 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 it just sounds a bit derogatory there, but I'm just saying,
Yeah.
It's that complex.
How do you feel about the whole, because you'll see this quite a lot quoted and plastered around, that up until recently, there wasn't care homes. You wouldn't see elderly people homes. In fact, well, here they might have been around a little bit longer here, but if you go back home, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, all of these countries, subcontinent, it was a rare thing. In fact, now they are popping up now, but it wasn't a thing, was it?
I think they've increased partially because of a need for those people who aren't being looked after genuinely. Because you still hear stories and you watch videos, people caught on CCTV where they're battering their mother-in-laws and stuff like that. You see stuff like that.
Yeah.
To safeguard them, there's a need for them to exist. But at the same time, it gives an easy way out for those people who just want an easier life and they don't want to take on responsibility either.
So
I think, you know what? Is there a right and a wrong answer? I think it is completely dependent on particular circumstances.
Yeah.
On different circumstances.
There's a right answer. There's a wrong answer.
And there's a complex answer.
There's a complex answer. There's a right way to do the wrong thing. There's the wrong way to do the right thing. There's the wrong way to do the wrong thing. Do you know what I mean? It just goes on.
Yeah.
And it is very difficult. But I think there's a lot of people now that are in that situation who've got their parents at home and they're getting older and they're getting, that little bit more brittle.
You know what, Ali? It's not just about being brittle. I've had several conversations. I have, we live together, my mum and I, and
of course,
and our family, and I've often had other people say to me, Maj, I'm in a similar situation. I've got my mum living, with us and everything, but things are becoming tough. I can't make sense of sometimes the way she's doing things, or my father's doing things, or whatever. The understanding that people tend to overlook is the understanding of the evolution of human beings as time goes on. What we fail to recognize sometimes is when we're young, we see our parents, the strong parent, the person who was our guardian, who looked after us, who fed us, who clothed us, who did everything for us, suddenly become a person who is now becoming more childlike, stubborn, indecisive, weak, needy, and these are very good points. But sometimes we don't think, by taking a step back at times and think to ourselves, hang on, that makes sense now. My parent is growing old.
Yeah.
My parent's not able to look after herself or himself. My father is becoming a child. My mother is becoming childlike. She's having arguments with my kids like a child would.
Yes.
Yeah. And you know what the sad thing is those parents who have other kids, like the elderly who've got kids and they're living with, let's just say, one of their child and their family, the other ones sometimes just take a back foot. Complete back foot. This, I think, also needs to be recognized. So if anyone has their parent being looked after by another sibling of theirs, they need to understand there are a lot of challenges that go with that. The responsibility, for example, as Muslims, the responsibility of a child or of a parent is not just on one child, right? It's a collective responsibility. Yes. So all the children need to recognize that if one of their siblings has stepped up to make sure that their parent is okay, that they're still doing their part, and not just by dropping in once in a while or calling once in a while, but actually making the parent feel like that they still have their children, and that can involve a lot of things. Because I know people who have their parent being looked after by one sibling, and they've just completely disregarded everything else. So it's even nice to just ask your parent, okay, they may be living separately. You might just say, oh, shall I cook for you guys today? Or what would you like to eat today? Asking is one thing, but then doing stuff without asking is another thing altogether. Don't even bother asking sometimes. And the fact that you actually do, because sometimes parents don't want to put their children out of their way.
Yeah, they're not going to say do this and do that and cook this and cook that. You're right. Absolutely.
Just make it and bring it. That's like Eid for them. That's like a celebration for them.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Okay, now we're in a lockdown situation. Now we have to, make sure that, we're keeping some distance and whatnot. But there's nothing stopping you from cooking something and bringing it over and dropping it off. Something simple like that. And even more importantly, the sibling of yours who is taking that task on, if they're taking it willingly, they're going to see it as a blessing anyway.
Yeah, of course.
They're not going to ask you for anything.
Yeah.
They'll never ask you for anything. They want to get all the good deeds.
Yeah.
Yeah. But how about you give them a bit of a break sometime by just saying to them, look, on such a weekend, why don't you and the family go out and we look after the mum or the dad?
Yeah.
Do you know how much that means?
Yeah, to somebody who's in essence a full-time carer, isn't it?
Yeah, because that's exactly what it is. I don't think other siblings really truly appreciate what that one sibling may be doing to look after their parent, because the parents of everybody in that family.
Yeah.
So if you've got another sibling looking after your parents, however they may be looking after, they may be doing whatever they can. Don't just sit back and criticize. Don't just sit back and just think everything's, okay. Don't just sit back and think, oh, because usually what happens is, I know in certain cultures, especially the Pakistani culture, they feel that the youngest son will look after the parents because he's going to inherit everything anyway. Right? This is a cultural thing, not an Islamic thing. It's a cultural thing, right? However, I mean, let's just say even if it is that son may say, actually, that's BS because I want to do the things the Islamic way and everything's going to be split the way Islam requires us to anyway. But irrespective of that, if you have a parent, irrespective of what the assets are, your care for your parent shouldn't depend on what you get in form of inheritance.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Because then what you're doing is you're doing business. You're not caring.
No.
That's not love.
It's not. And
that's a transaction.
You've got to think back to when your parents cared for you.
Yeah.
Nothing gets more.
Did they say I'm gonna only care for this child because one day he's gonna earn and give everything of his to me, or he's gonna look after me, or whatever?
Yeah, no, absolutely not. Absolutely not. I've also seen that come back to bite parents though,
because they've had high expectations of their children.
Yeah,
and then they didn't get it.
They didn't get it. Yeah, it just makes you wonder, isn't it, that everybody is putting other people through things. For example, parents sometimes put their kids through things needlessly, and they'll struggle and they'll not be happy for a number of years, and then in their parents' old age, they'll almost resent them, It's another issue. Even though the parents had the child's best interest at heart, just wanted him or her to do well, to achieve, to be successful or whatever. But it wasn't in the way that the child wanted. Now that's turned into resentment, and that resentment shows in the care of the elderly person. Yeah. It's such a horrible position to be in, and it's so difficult to get out of for people who are in there. I mean, you mentioned obviously cases of abuse. Now they're far more extreme, hopefully more rare.
Hopefully, yeah.
But is there any getting out of such mindsets? Once you're in a certain way, you're in a certain way, and trying to care for the person that you resent or have certain memories of, it's difficult. It's not easy.
Well, this is why I mentioned that when you've got parents who have abused their children, naturally that child is not going to really feel like caring for that parent.
Yeah.
It's natural.
Yeah. I mean, you obviously live with your mom, right? Always have done?
No. So we have the family home. My father passed away when I was 14. I was 18 when I went to uni, and I lived away. And then since then I'd lived away until 2000 and I was 25ish. I came back, and then I got married when I was 27, and since then, even though I've been working out and about, that's essentially been my base.
So there was no transition from saying, I don't know, I live by myself or with my wife and kids, but now my parents are old, they're going to move in with me. There was no kind of... So that was always
I actually moved into the family home.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Mum does not want to move from there.
I can understand that.
Yeah, so my father passed away in that house. So the sentimental...
you guys grew up in that house.
We grew up in that house. So we can go and buy 101 different properties. She will not move from there.
Yeah, that's the family home.
We've got other siblings who live nearby as well. So that's her life. And at her age, I wouldn't want to kind of... As much as I'd love to move from, into a different place now, I wouldn't want to disrupt her.
You live in a very popular place. There's plenty of action there.
Well, that's it. It's always eventful, isn't it?
But okay, so over the years, then have you seen, have you seen a lot of changes? Have you seen
in what?
Has there been times where you think, hang on, you look to yourself and you think, Maj, come on, you're being a little bit short, or you're being a little bit agitated for nothing. you know, or
regarding what?
Regarding, for example, caring for your mom. You know how you spoke earlier about people get to a certain age
and they change, the behavior changes
back towards that childishness, isn't it? It's not childish, it's childishness.
Yes, you see, what's happened is, because I've got kids, and I now have my kids observing my treatment towards my mother. I'm very conscious of that.
You're aware of this, good.
I'm very conscious of that. Now, sometimes my mother and my kids may have an altercation of some kind, on a minor level, right? Just something minor. Nothing. They've never had any kind of big argument or anything. Alhamdulillah.
That's minor,
yeah, they have their little thing going on. But when my kids have been like, my elder kids, like my eldest is 12, so the ones younger, slightly younger, they all understand. But the ones who are like really small, like 3-year-old or 5-year-old, if they ever said that, Dado's done this or Dado said this to me, now that puts me in check as well, actually, because the way I explain things to them will make put a certain view of my mother in their eyes. So they see me, if I'm massaging my mum's shoulders in the evening, if she's not feeling well, I'm taking her to the doctor or the hospital, or whatever she wants from the shopping center we'll get, my wife will get, or I will get. So we try and make her life as comfortable as possible. In fact, my wife doesn't let her cook, doesn't let her wash, doesn't let her clean, doesn't let her iron, doesn't let her do anything, right? But that's not a good thing either, because recently she had a bit of a health scare, and we realized, hang on, this is not good. She needs to do more,
needs
right?
to be active in some way.
Yeah. So I try and encourage her to go for a walk, so maybe one of my kids will go for a walk with her. But that's my way of explaining to her, that you need to look after your health. But the way I'm interacting with her, I have to sometimes, you're right, I have to sometimes stand back and think to myself, what just happened there? And I'm glad, alhamdulillah, that God's given me the ability to, I don't get angry very quickly. It takes a lot for me to get angry, right? But if I lose my patience or anything, I do have this habit of analyzing the situation before I respond. I don't react, I respond. There's a difference. So, I used to when I was a lot younger, but I don't anymore. But as time's gone on, observing my mum's behavior, observing the way she is, she's our mother at the end of the day, and I love her to bits, and I wouldn't want anything, in any way I wouldn't want her to be uncomfortable, even in terms of behavior, let alone physical kind of luxuries and whatnot. So yeah, I do have to sometimes, because I've noticed a difference in her personality as time's going on, but I'm able to reconcile that towards whatever it is in terms of her age and her growing up, and growing up.
And there's the fact that you know her. You know her in a way which your kids never knew her. So you've got you,
and not just that, I know her in a way which none of my siblings will know her,
because you've lived
because we live together. They never see sides to her which I see, or my wife sees.
This is where I think some people go wrong, and I think we've probably all seen examples of it, and there's movies and stuff made out of it. Is that once your parents, your mother or your father, they're at a certain age, and then your kids are sort of up and coming, young teenagers or even younger, and there's kickoffs in the house, the person in the middle will often side with their children against their own parent.
This is,
I could never understand that mindset, regardless of what they're thinking. Whether they're thinking that, such and such's mom is so old, and why did she do this? Why they got to be like this? What's not even crossing their mind is what you spoke about earlier.
Well, this comes down to what they observe. And I'll give you a typical example. I've just got, my niece has just made a comment. In fact, it's my grandniece who's made a comment from my niece's account on YouTube, Marwa. Assalamu alaikum, Marwa, if you're listening. So I'll give you their example. Their father, who's, and my sister, who's their mother. Their father, for example, Allah bless his mother, she's passed away as well.
I mean.
And their siblings, they would physically kiss the feet of their mother. Physically. Now, there's one thing saying it metaphorically. They physically did it.
Oh, okay.
Right? And they would, if you can imagine the impact that has on their offspring.
on the children watching.
On the children watching. My father, who is classed as an elderly person himself, is in his late 50s or 60s now, yeah, still kissed his own mother's feet physically. You know, this is a sign of respect in certain cultures, for those of you who may not know what that actually means. But there's a sign of respect in form of a greeting. Is a form of a greeting. And can you imagine the impact that has? On the opposite end of the scale, you can see those parents that you talked about who would side their children against anybody.
Yes.
Including their own parents, including their own siblings, including their teachers. And I've seen that. I've seen parents side with their children against the child's teacher for over, insignificant things. What are you teaching that child?
Yeah, and I think we spoke about this last week. It's just
ideally, in my eyes, in my ideal world, I would love to have this circle or cycle of life where the parents, this is the Islamic way, actually. The Prophet ﷺ said to even the son of a Sahaba that you and your wealth belong to your father. Yeah. Look at the emphasis brought not just on looking after, but the wealth as well. How many people do we see now who give their wealth, all of their wealth, and say, my father is responsible, even at an elderly age? Everybody does, lots of different things.
Yeah.
But what does that, maybe their father may not be able to manage or handle the financial elements of something as well as they do, in which case you would have to sit down and discuss and say, okay, father, this is the situation. This is different, isn't it?
Yeah. But I think in cases where the father is able to handle, they're not getting that.
They're not getting that respect.
Yeah.
In my eyes, the ideal life would be you looking after your parents. I think is the right thing to do. Yeah. And if you've got more siblings to support, fine, excellent. If you haven't, then I know there are complications, and it's not an easy way of looking at life, and we can't fully appreciate what you're going through. What your decision may be to put your parents in a home.
Yeah.
These are all subjective. We can never fathom what you're going through because we're not going through it, and we can't understand the challenges in the same way because there may be other factors involved which we can't understand. Yeah. You're looking after your parents, your children are seeing that you're looking after your parents, in turn your children look after you. And imagine if that continues as a cycle. How wonderful would that life be? Because imagine if you've got children at a relatively young age, by the time you're 50, your children might be 20, 25, 30 even, right? And they're doing the same. Imagine your children then supporting you've retired at the age of 45, 50. Imagine that, retiring at the age of 45.
This cycle that you speak of, it's only very recently broken, isn't it?
In what respect?
Looking after your parents, then your children look after you, and then this happened. This was the norm.
It's still norm for some people. It's still the norm for some people.
Yeah, so it's only now
those who have held on to that.
Yeah.
But those who haven't, they've lost it quickly. Very quickly.
Yeah. And it doesn't end well for them when they're the elderly parents.
Exactly. Because they can say all they like, you should respect your parents, you need to look after your parents. Well, hang on. When you had your parents, how much did I see you looking after them?
Yeah.
They can say, oh, well, because my parent lived with my other brother or my sister, they were looked after. Well, that's fine. But we never saw you go there regularly. We never saw you bring them stuff regularly. Once in a while you might gift them with a pair of clothes or something, but is that really looking after them?
Yeah.
That's just a gift you would give to anybody.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
This is it. This is true.
There's a difference between gifting something to someone and actually taking on responsibility to look after them.
The cycle broke. Inadvertently, whatever it was, the wheel fell off. Now what?
Now you reap what you sow. It's as simple as that.
It's true.
It's as simple as that. Look, there are other things people can do to kind of get back on track and to compensate to a degree. If they can show, if they still have their parents around, get back in touch. Do what you can. I've seen parents reunited with their own children after 15 odd years of not speaking with them for whatever reasons. And it just took a moment of walking into the house by that child for the parent to embrace them. That's all it took. Walking into the house. Don't be flipping stubborn. Don't be arrogant. It's your mom and it's your dad at the end of the day. They're never going to turn you away.
Yeah. They've probably put up with a lot more of your shit than...
Literally.
Whatever.
Literally.
Well, yeah, literally.
Literally.
Yeah.
Right? Get back in there. Demonstrate to your offspring, your children, what being a child is about. You are still a child even when you're 60 if you've still got your parents around. Once you have your parents, you are a child to someone. You will always be a child to that person. And you know, I've seen people actually talk about how they went to their father in their 40s, and the father was in their mid-60s, was nearly 70, and they said to their father, come up, get up a second. And he said, because his father was known to be a stern person, a cold, stern, rigid type of a personality. He said, get up. Eventually, he managed to convince him to get up, and he just hugged him. He hugged his father. He'd never hugged him in his life, right? And his father was like, as in, if you were going to do something like this, you should have started earlier.
20 years ago, yeah.
You should have started earlier. Some parents aren't very good at showing affection, because that's just the way they've been brought up, the what they've seen around them in their environment. It doesn't mean to say they don't want affection or they don't crave affection. But the moment you show that affection to an elderly person, you tell me of one elderly person who doesn't melt by showing them affection. Or any person.
No reason why. But the example that you just gave has got me
thinking about
in flipping Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gham. What's that all about? But I guess it just comes down to the fact that, you know, these movie scripts and storylines and drama serials, they're not out of thin air, are they? They are a lot of people's reality. You know, it is happening, and that's where they get these ideas from. It's always so heartbreaking, isn't it?
You know, these Bollywood and sometimes these movies, they are exaggerated to a lot. This is why they're called dramas as well. They're dramatized, right? And I hate watching some of these because they're so far from reality. So far from reality. But if there's any one thing that I can say to anybody, as somebody who does live with a parent and looks after the parent, is your parents are always wanting to see you happy. They're wanting to see you well. They may, on the face of it, you know, swear at you. You know, I know some proper desi type of people, you know, every second word is ma or ben, right? Know, it's like, it's just the way they speak. But don't take it personally. Your parents are your parents, and if you've had a really tough upbringing and you've seen abuse or faced abuse, that's a completely different situation. I'm not suggesting for a minute that, you know, although forgiveness, the one who forgives is much greater than the one who doesn't. That situation alone, in a traditional setup, when you do have parents, as May says, sometimes even a phone call is all we need. You know, May is one of our senior members of a group that we work in together for the homeless people, and a phone call is all.
I think I'm looking at May's comment and I'm thinking that's exactly what our elderly are like, our parents and grandparents. So May says, spot on, Majid, you do reap what you sow. As harsh as it may be, but it's true, right? My son takes care of my finances and daughter my welfare. Only if I really need her would I bother them. They have lives too, but you know they would be there in a moment if I asked. This is the level of care that our parents have for us. You know, in their 70s, in their 80s, in their 90s, they're like, Nana Puttara, I don't want to trouble you. You know, you've got work, you've got kids to look after, you've got this to do.
They will never want to kind of put you out of the way so much that you end up resenting them for it. Do you know what I mean? This is the way things are.
So it comes back to the point, and I think very valuable advice you gave earlier, that look, make time for them and stop asking, you know, stop making an offer of these gestures. Just do it.
On point.
You know,
just do it.
We're not sponsored by Nike or anyone, but just do it.
Just do it.
And I think that's the we're only allowed to say it so many times, otherwise they've got to pay us.
Yeah.
But yeah, no.
But that's definitely what it comes to. And then if you think about you having your kids, what are you showing them? I know people who have got kids, they've got parents, they're living separately with their kids, and their kids would never or very rarely visit their grandparents.
There's no connection, is there?
There is no connection.
That's down to the connector.
The
middle
link. The link.
Yeah.
The link is the parent, the child of the elderly.
Yeah.
So the middle link,
Yeah.
if that's broken, you're not going to have that connection.
Yeah.
And then you can't expect your children then to look after you.
Yeah, exactly. It's not going to
In
get
that
better.
way.
It's not going to end well for you.
Again, you may have the exception. You may have
Yeah.
a child or two who have their head screwed on and think, okay, fair enough, my father may not have, or my mother may not have done right, but I'm not going to be like that.
Yeah.
So people who
It's
are
rare. You know what?
But
It's rare that people who didn't look after their parents, one, or people who weren't good to their own kids, two. It doesn't often end well for them. Their old age and their time of need is it's quite often a dark one. You know, and the strange thing is that they never see it coming.
Yeah, they're blind.
Yeah.
Or they just
everybody else can see it.
Or they've got their head buried in the sand.
Yeah.
It's very unfortunate. I think, again, it comes down... Look, you can always say you reap what you sow. But when you've got, for example, one surviving parent, they've got several children. Although it's a collective responsibility in my eyes for all the children to look after that parent may have themselves been good with their own parents. They may have demonstrated how to do that as well. But very few of their children will have that, urge to replicate that for them. This is, again, you have exceptions to the general rule. Not everybody, we talk about you reap what you sow. You may have sown all the right seeds, but then you still get the exceptions.
There's going to be exceptions. And the thing is, we can't focus on that. I tend not to talk about exceptions to every rule, because generally speaking, when you aim to do something, you're going to look at the 99% probability on you.
Yeah, of course.
So
of course.
If you look at the exception, if you watched a movie Devil Child and you think, I'm not going to do this, that, I'm not going to be nice to my kids because that he might grow up to be Devil Child. It doesn't work like that. Yeah, there could be an exception, but the thing is, you do your best hoping for the best outcome, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
And the effort has to be there, and the rest you leave in God's hands. The exceptions are always going to be.
I think, if anything, if I was to share from my own personal experiences, is that there is a lot that people assume that a parent may want without really considering what they actually need. There's a difference. And they don't need much.
No.
They don't need much at all.
They don't want for much.
And as they grow older, they want less and less and less.
Yeah.
And I'm talking from experience. So if anyone's watching or listening to this and they feel that it's going to be difficult to look after their parents, think again. Because one day you will be in a situation where you may have children, you'll be the parent. What kind of example do you want your children?
Well, this is it. Your children are then going to make that same skeleton list that you did with your parents. Do they really need this? Do they really need that? Do I have to take them to visit their friend? Do they actually need to go to the doctors? Do they really need to get out? No, whatever. And you just skim it right down.
And stop passing responsibility to other people. I know of people who it's their responsibility, but they'll try and pass that responsibility either to their wife or their other siblings about looking after their own parents. That's another thing which, when I think about it, I think to myself, what's going on here?
I think ours was probably the first generation to do that. It definitely wasn't learned.
I'll give you an example of my cousin who I talked to you about, who kissed his own mother's feet. Yeah.
Subhanallah, yeah.
Let me give you another example of his. Now, Kharan Sahu, I mentioned my niece, her brother Afzal. He was instructed by his father, who is my cousin, to buy a mobile phone for my mum.
Mm-hmm.
Right, because my mum had an old iPhone, right? And somebody's kind of mentioned that, oh, you've got a bit of an old phone there, haven't you? So it kind of stuck in my mum's mind, right?
Yeah.
So she was like, oh, is this really old? She didn't even know how to use it, right?
Yeah.
So she goes, I think I need to get a new phone. So she mentioned it to my sister and my cousin in conversation. And my cousin said to my nephew, listen, Nano needs a new phone, right? We're going to get her phone, but you need to be quick, because I want to get the rewards for gifting her with that phone before Majid gets it.
Love it.
You see, there's a competition to do good.
Yeah.
There's they compete to see who's going to do more for the parent.
Yes.
Now, she's the only last surviving person of that generation for all our relatives, and like my cousins and stuff, right? So they do go out of their way for my mum as well. But what I'm saying is, you can either be of that mindset and want to reap rewards and think of the afterlife and think about what your children are going to. Now imagine what his children are going to see by him doing stuff like that. My cousin doing stuff like that.
Yeah, it's amazing.
What are you educating them? What are you teaching them? And then the amount of stuff they do for charity as well, for other people's mothers, it's unbelievable. Not just mothers. Recently, just yesterday, I'll mention it because as an example, it's just not. I don't usually like to mention these things. We came to know of a family who were getting their daughter married, but didn't have the finances available to even do a simple nikah, right? And to do set the family up a little bit. Now, as it happened, so my family, we arranged some stuff for them, right? And as it happened, my cousin who I told you about had already done some stuff as well.
For the same
family,
wow.
right?
Okay.
Now, by the time I'd sent my money, one of the families, they were like, thank you very much, but such a person has already sorted this out. But what we'll do is, if it's okay with you, we'd like to use this to open an account for the other sisters who need to get wed, or the son who's going to get married. And I thought, wow, you see, this is the, and if you're in that mindset, your life is completely different. Your life is completely different. What your purpose is to serve.
I think it's very important for your kids to see this mindset. If they see enough of you putting yourself first, of you saying, look, I haven't got time to look after my parents, or I won't be able to do it properly. I have to do this, I have to do that. I can't do this, I can't do that. I can't give to charity. I can't help that. That family that wants to get their daughter married, because in 15 years time I'm going to have to get my daughter married, and your kids will pick up on that, and even though you didn't learn it from your parents because they weren't like that, now what's happened is your children have learned that from you. So you obviously deviated 1, 2, 5, 7%, whatever it is, but you've really fast-tracked your children towards a whole different path.
Completely different. I mean, the thing is, you do have parents who don't want to be involved or don't want to have their children, as a parent, you want what's best for your children, right? You don't want them to suffer because of yourself. Becky's a classic example. She's commented and said, I've asked that once I am older that I go into a care home so I'm not a burden on my children. I want them to have the opportunity to live their lives before they themselves are too old to help. So that's her view on things, and she feels that she doesn't want to burden them.
See, I tell you where the problem could possibly lie here. Now, that I would expect no less from loving parents than to say, I don't want to burden my kids. It all now depends on the children and what they've learned and what character they are. Whether they turn around and say, oh, okay, mom, I'll see you later. Every other Sunday.
Or I don't care what you say, you're not a burden for us.
That's it.
I don't see you as a burden, and in fact for me it's a blessing that we're able to
this is it, isn't it? And I think parents will never want to be a burden on their kids, because these are the kids that they've raised, they've brought into this world, they've raised them, they've spent their life on them. Not just their life savings, but their actual life on them. So everything they do is for their kids.
Yeah.
The last thing they want to do is trouble their kids.
Exactly.
Now, if those kids can't turn around and say, Mom, you gave me life. You gave me your life.
Yeah.
My life is yours.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is it. This goes back to that circle that you're talking about. We need to reconnect this circle wherever possible.
I think those people who adhere to a certain value system, or even like an Islamic value system, Islamic way of life, they understand whether they actually listen. There's a difference between hearing and listening. You often hear the phrase, "I told him so many times, but he just won't listen."
Yeah.
There's a difference between hearing and listening. People hear these things. People sometimes don't even understand these things. But what they do with that is, again, going to be ultimately their choice. This is where we have freedom of choice. And that freedom to choose what to do is ultimately going to decide their future as well, going forwards. I think it's going to heavily impact them at least. And I think, it's that circle of life thing that we keep talking about. For me, it just comes down to that every time it comes down to that.
Final thoughts. If you have parents, respect them, love them, look after them. They want no ill or bad for you ever. It may not seem like it at times. Again, I would say there are some evil people out there who are the exception to the rule, in which case, do what you must. But if you're living in a setup where you have a healthy family upbringing, do the right thing. Everybody deep down knows what the right thing is. And I think they just need to tap into do the right thing, whatever that right thing might be. No, I agree. I think if you've had to do a hell of a lot of convincing to yourself in order to try and justify, offsetting or off-shooting your parents or their responsibility, then you in your mind and your heart, it's already wrong. Look, there's always going to be rare examples of parents having to go into care, having to go into homes, and having to leave the family home. But ultimately, that's the last thing that anybody wants to do. They don't want to leave their family home. They don't want to be an inconvenience, or they don't want to be a burden. But I think the circle of life is a brilliant analogy. Treat your parents how you want to be treated by your kids, ultimately. If nothing else, if not for the fact that you love them, for the fact that they raised you, for the fact that they gave you life and then gave you their life. So I think that pretty much wraps us up today. Wow. You know what? I feel it's one of those topics we could really go on. There's probably so many angles that we haven't covered.
There probably are. I think you've got the angle of the parents themselves, parents being elderly, not just elderly, parents needing actual care. Like if they're like really ill, they may be immobile. There are complexities in that. We discussed this at the beginning. There's so many different factors to consider in the first place. And this is why I said at the end, do what is right. Everyone knows what right is from wrong deep down.
To start with, they do, don't they? Wow. Okay, so we're going to wrap it up there, guys. Remember, keep following us, Beardos Media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all the usual handles. But until next week, inshallah. See you then.